Friday, the 6th of September 2019, early morning. Before most people had even opened their curtains, officers were already moving into position. A phone line that had run for years was about to fall silent. And inside the group behind it, a betrayal had already pushed things towards violence. May 2023, Birmingham. A container filled with pomegranate juice was being unloaded in a quiet yard. Nothing looked unusual, except investigators had been waiting for that shipment long before it arrived. Two moments, years apart, both hiding something far bigger than they appeared. This is the story of a £2 million county line network and a £20 million heroin pipeline, and how both were finally brought down. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. Before we get into how the Echo line worked, we need to understand the people who built it, the group behind the phones, the routes, and the violence that kept the network alive. They operated as an 18-strong, organised crime group built around a simple structure. At the centre was Colin Jones, the controlling figure. Jones rarely appeared at street level. Instead, he used multiple phones, encrypted devices, and trusted intermediaries to shield himself from direct contact. Below him sat David Rawling, effectively the second in command. He managed day-to-day operations, issued instructions to runners, oversaw resupply when stocks ran low, and handled problems within the network. When the organisation faced internal issues, which we will discuss in a few minutes, Rawling became the person Jones relied on to enforce discipline and protect the operation's flow of money. Further down the structure were individuals who handled region-specific responsibilities. Lee Murray, also known as Go or Echo, previously operated as the Echo line's primary call handler, but we will talk about him in a few minutes. On the other hand, Jack Jones served as one of the key storage men, responsible for holding bulk quantities before they were broken down and moved onwards. Keith Firmedge, working closely with Jones in Liverpool, assisted with wider distribution, including movements linked to Scotland. The next tier included trusted couriers and local distributors. Sean and Stephen Dooley were relied upon for regular movements between Liverpool and North Wales, working within the system but outside Jones's immediate core. In D-side, Anthony Stagg, his daughter Tony Stagg, and his partner Lisa Tinson formed a downstream unit. They handled local distribution, passed drugs further down the chain, and provided phones and transport essential to the lower-level dealing. Other defendants filled narrower but important roles. Leon Langford stepped in as an operations manager when local distributors were arrested. Peter Powell provided transport and phone support. James Hughes acted as a runner linked directly to the Echo line. Patricia Massingham stored substantial quantities at her home, and Barry Rush worked as a courier trusted with multi-kilogram movements. Furthermore, Anthony Fay handled pickups from Liverpool to Anglesey, and Edward White helped collect and distribute orders around Connors Quay. Together, the 18 formed a structured network, one that relied on tight communication, clear hierarchy, and a chain of individuals who each understood their place within the wider operation. The Echo line began quietly in early 2017, long before officers understood the scale it would eventually reach. At that point, it operated from Liverpool's Walton area, where Colin Jones had two properties he used as the base for sourcing drugs and organising early supply runs. The setup was simple at first. Bulk quantities were brought into Liverpool, broken down, and moved into North Wales through a small group of trusted runners who delivered to Connors Quay and neighbouring towns. The earliest movements were modest compared with what followed, but the pattern was already forming. Liverpool as the hub, D-side as the target market, and a single phone line directing everything in between. Police first caught sight of the line's activity in March 2017, when a search warrant in Connors Quay led to the seizure of 25 wraps of heroin, valued at around £250. That discovery resulted in the arrest of local distributor Anthony Stagg, but the impact on the network was minimal. The Echo line simply continued, with the call handler redirecting customers and replacing runners as needed. It was an early indication of how resilient the structure was. The loss of any single person didn't slow it down. Throughout 2017 and 2018, the line grew steadily. Orders were taken through a dedicated mobile number based in Liverpool. Runners were dispatched to familiar pickup points such as the tunnels near the sports pitches in Connah's Quay, where buyers were told to collect their deals. The phone system used prepaid handsets, changed frequently, and relied on short-coded messages. By mid-2018, the volume coming through the line had increased significantly. Early supply runs had developed into a regular daily rhythm, with customer demand allowing Jones and his team to expand further along the North Wales coast. As the Echo line expanded, the operation shifted from local dealing to a structured commercial supply network, reaching across the UK, and soon grew into a system that fed markets in North Wales, Merseyside, Aberdeen, Dumfries, Devon, and Cornwall. The model remained the same as discussed earlier. Echo line operated 7 days a week. It took 160,000 calls and texts between April and July 2018 alone, and reached up to £2 million per month. To protect the operation as it grew, Jones introduced layers of security. He used multiple phones, 5 registered, 4 unregistered, and 2 encrypted devices similar to those used by the military. These encrypted handsets allowed him to communicate without leaving a digital trail. Runners also carried numerous prepaid devices, frequently swapped to avoid detection. Jones even had premises swept for listening equipment, showing how aware he was of the risks of surveillance. The group's inner circle used lie detector tests costing £150 per person to ensure loyalty and identify anyone suspected of diverting profits. The system looked unshakable from the outside, but inside the group, a single conflict was about to turn everything unstable. In 2018, the Echo line was running at full capacity, and Lee Murray remained central to its daily operation. He controlled the main phone line, took the orders, directed runners, and coordinated deliveries into Connah's Quay and beyond. His position gave him access to the money coming in, and over time, suspicions grew that he was taking more than he should. Within the group, it was described simply as skimming, small amounts taken often enough to matter. For Colin Jones, who ran the network with strict control over profit and loyalty, it was a breach he wouldn't ignore. The relationship between Jones and Murray deteriorated quickly once the allegations surfaced. What had been a straightforward working structure turned into open distrust. Murray's role in the Echo line meant he handled both customers and runners, and Jones began to question how much cash was being diverted before it reached him. The tension wasn't just financial, it threatened the stability of the entire operation. Murray was gradually pushed out of decision-making, and responsibility began shifting to others, including David Rawling, who Jones increasingly relied on to stabilise the network. During this period, police in Scotland intercepted a half-kilogram package of cocaine, 69% pure, intended for the group. The parcel was linked directly to Murray through his handling of the Echo line phone, showing how far the supply chain had stretched. It highlighted his importance to the operation and the scale at which the group was dealing, even as his standing inside the organisation was collapsing. The breakdown reached a point where Jones discussed dealing with Murray permanently. Within the group, the phrase "do a double one" was used, a reference understood by investigators as planning serious violence. What began as suspicion over money had shifted into something far more dangerous, and while none of them realised it yet, their conversations at this stage were already being picked up by police watching from the outside. The turning point came when officers quietly placed a covert listening device inside David Rawling's blue Ford C-Max. He used the car constantly, meeting runners, collecting cash, and travelling between Liverpool and North Wales. From the moment the device went live, investigators finally heard the group in their own words. Conversations recorded inside that vehicle revealed how the network was being run, who was giving the instructions, and how close tensions inside the group had come to erupting into violence. Rawling didn't realise that every journey, each discussion, and every plan was being captured in real time. Alongside the audio, surveillance teams tracked the group across Liverpool, Prestwich, and Deeside, quietly building a picture of the route the drugs took. They followed vehicles leaving the Walton base, monitored exchanges in known dealing areas, and watched the runners arrive at locations where customers were directed through the Echo line. These observations were matched with ANPR hits, confirming the movement of specific vehicles on supply runs. Each scan showed the same pattern. Mobile phone analysis strengthened the picture further. Officers mapped the Echo line's activity, linked contact patterns to individual defendants, and tied specific devices to journeys already identified through ANPR. The data showed when the line was active, which numbers were taking orders, and how often certain phones travelled with the couriers. Combined with the recordings from Rawling's vehicle, investigators were able to match voices to movements and movements to specific roles within the hierarchy. During the surveillance, officers also became aware of a rising threat of serious violence towards Lee Murrian. What we have just covered, the information gathered was concerning enough that police issued a formal threat to life notice, warning Murray that he was in danger. That development confirmed to investigators that the network was beginning to fracture internally, and that the risks were escalating far beyond routine drug supply. By the time surveillance concluded, officers had the one thing they had been missing for years: a clear, uninterrupted view inside the heart of the Echo line. It was enough to move from watching to taking the network apart. The operation moved from surveillance to action on the 6th of September 2019, when coordinated dawn raids were carried out across North Wales, Merseyside, and Scotland. Teams struck simultaneously at properties linked to the highest-ranking members of the Echo line, aiming to dismantle the network before anyone could react. In Deeside, officers forced entry into addresses used as local hubs, while in Liverpool they targeted Jones's bases in Walton and other properties tied to storage and mixing. Police Scotland executed warrants connected to the group's northern supply chain, including locations linked to the intercepted cocaine parcel. Across the searches, officers seized evidence that displayed the scale of the operation. In North Wales, they recovered cash totaling around £80,000, quantities of Class A drugs prepared for local distribution, and multiple burner phones tied to the Echo line's contact system. Properties associated with Patricia Massingham had previously held up to 8 kilograms of drugs. At addresses linked to local dealers such as the Stags and Tinson, officers found wraps ready for sale, weighing scales, cutting agents, and further mobile devices. In Liverpool, investigators again uncovered mixing materials, encrypted handsets, and documents tying several defendants to the wider network. With the key figures arrested, the structure that had seemed so resilient began to unravel. Interviews with several defendants showed that many were unaware of the full scale of the organization, only realizing during the raids how wide the operation had stretched. The arrests removed the organizers, the storekeepers, the couriers, and the call handlers in one decisive sweep. What followed was the culmination of years of building a case, a point where officers could finally present the hierarchy in full and move the investigation into the courtroom. The defendants were brought before Mould Crown Court for a 3-day sentencing hearing. The courtroom remained full throughout, with officers from North Wales Police, Merseyside Police, and Police Scotland present to hear how the investigation they had spent years building would conclude. The prosecution described the network as highly organised and presented all the evidence that police had gathered, which we have already discussed. Defence teams offered mitigation for each defendant. Several cited addiction issues, poor physical or mental health, or limited roles within the wider structure. In some cases, they stressed that individuals had been driven by their own dependency rather than criminal ambition. Others argued a lack of awareness of the operation's true scale, noting that some defendants had only handled small amounts locally and had no insight into the network's nationwide reach. Judge Nicholas Parry addressed the court with clear, firm remarks. He described the operation as being of unusual magnitude, noting its cross-border scope and the volume of drugs involved. He highlighted the incalculable harm caused to communities in Deeside and across North Wales, and emphasised that the Echo Line had operated with industrial efficiency, masking its activities behind layers of communication, couriers and safe houses. When the final day of hearings concluded, the court moved through each defendant in turn, setting out their roles and the sentences that followed. At the top of the organisation, Colin Jones received 21 years. 14 years were imposed for directing the drug supply operation, with a further 7 added for his part in the conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm, a reflection of both his leadership and the violence that had begun to develop within the group. Beside him in the hierarchy, David Rawling was handed 15 years and 6 months. Murray himself received 10 years, acknowledging both the importance of his role earlier in the operation and the scale of supply linked to his devices. Lower in the chain, those handling day-to-day distribution received substantial custodial terms. Anthony Stagg was jailed for 4 years, while his daughter, Tony Stagg, was sentenced to 4 years as well. Lisa Tinson, a partner in their downstream activity, received 6.5 years. The Dooley brothers, Sean and Stephen, received 9 years and 8 years respectively. Jack Jones was jailed for 7.5 years. Among those linked to wider distribution, Keith Vermage received 10.5 years, while Barry Roche was sentenced to 9 years. Patricia Massingham was given 4.5 years. Several defendants with more limited but still essential roles also faced custodial terms. Anthony Fahey received 6.5 years. Edward White was sentenced to 4.5 years. Peter Powell received 4.5 years, while James Hughes was also jailed for 4.5 years. In total, the sentences handed down amounted to 146 years and 9 months, marking the conclusion of one of the largest organised crime investigations ever undertaken in North Wales. At the centre of the second case were Colin Bartlett, 54, and his son, Lee Bartlett, 30, 2 men from Bordesley Green in Birmingham, who became the UK-side operators of a heroin pipeline stretching directly from Afghanistan to the West Midlands. Unlike the chaotic street-level network seen in many domestic operations, this group functioned through a front company designed to look like a legitimate importer of pomegranate juice. On paper, the business had a director, but that director did not exist. The identity was fabricated to place a legal buffer between the Bartletts and whoever controlled the supply chain overseas. The wider organised crime group, still only partially identified, relied on shipping containers routed from Afghanistan, disguised as large-scale juice imports. The shipments were structured to appear legitimate, with thousands of bottles stacked inside commercial packaging. Hidden within this cargo was heroin dissolved or blended into the pomegranate juice itself, allowing the drugs to pass through international borders without attracting immediate suspicion. While the Bartletts were not the masterminds of the entire Afghan to UK chain, they were key operational links on British soil. The individuals trusted to receive shipments, organise labourers to unload them, and ensure the drugs could be separated from the legitimate product once inside the country. Their roles placed them firmly within the functioning core of the organised crime group, even though the true upper hierarchy behind the Afghan supply route remains unknown. The breakthrough came in May 2023, when a shipping container weighing 2.6 tons arrived in Birmingham. On paperwork, it was nothing more than a large consignment of pomegranate juice. But NCA intelligence had already indicated that this shipment was different, and potentially the one that would expose the pipeline. Inside the container were stacks of cardboard boxes, each filled with bottles of juice. To any casual observer, it looked legitimate. But dissolved within the liquid, and in some cases mixed directly into the bottles, was more than 420 kilograms of heroin, a load with a street value of more than £20 million. This wasn't a product hidden in secret compartments. It was blended into the cargo itself, designed to be chemically extracted after arrival. Expecting something significant, the NCA had already prepared a surveillance operation around the shipment. Officers monitored the journey, tracked its arrival, and positioned themselves to observe whoever came to unload it. The intelligence picture had suggested that the people receiving the container were connected directly to the UK distribution link of the Afghan supply chain, and this delivery would finally bring them into the open. When the container was finally opened in Birmingham, the NCA was already in position. 11 paid workers had been brought in to help unload the shipment, ordinary labourers with no knowledge of what was hidden inside the boxes. Their presence gave the entire scene the appearance of a routine commercial delivery, which is exactly what the organised crime group intended. From a discreet vantage point, NCA officers watched in real time as the Bartletts and the workers began removing the pallets of pomegranate juice. Every movement was monitored: who handled what, who gave instructions, who appeared to be directing the process. The officers waited for confirmation that the men on site were directly connected to the receiving end of the smuggling pipeline before intervening. The moment came quickly. As the unloading continued, officers observed enough to confirm the Bartletts' involvement. That's when the decision was made. Officers moved in decisively, surrounding the site and bringing the operation to a halt. Colin and Lee Bartlett were arrested at the scene, while the 11 workers were briefly detained, interviewed, and later released after it became clear they were not knowingly involved. Inside the container, investigators seized the shipment in its entirety, blended in such a way that only chemical processing could reveal the drug. The seizure confirmed the scale and sophistication of the smuggling method, making it one of the more unusual concealments encountered by the NCA. In the immediate aftermath, the container was transported for forensic examination, and the Bartletts were taken into custody. With the arrests made and the drugs secured, the NCA now had concrete evidence linking the suspects to the UK end of the Afghan import pipeline, and the investigation entered its final phase. While Colin and Lee Bartlett faced sentencing in Birmingham, 2 other men connected to the same investigation had already slipped beyond reach. Shimment Khan, 56, and Matiula Zamankal, 23, both from the Washwood Heath area, were wanted after failing to answer bail in November 2023. Their disappearance created a gap in the case. 2 individuals believed to hold knowledge of how the front company operated and potentially how the shipments made their way from Afghanistan into the UK. Both men were known to frequent areas around Alum Rock and Shaw Hill Road, the NCA described as close-knit, with strong family and community ties. Investigators believed they might still be circulating within those networks, supported by people who either didn't appreciate the scale of the trafficking plot or were intentionally shielding them from law enforcement. What made the search more urgent was the suspicion that Khan and Zamankal were not minor figures. Their links to the logistics side of the Birmingham operation suggested they played a role in the movement or reception of shipments. Their failure to return to court raised the possibility that they knew the investigation was closing in. The NCA issued a public appeal, warning that anyone helping the fugitives, whether by offering accommodation, transport, or simply concealing their whereabouts, risked being arrested themselves. The Bartlett case reached its conclusion in 2 stages. First came the August 2025 verdict, when a jury at Birmingham Crown Court found both Colin and Lee Bartlett guilty of participating in the criminal activities of an organised crime group. The Crown presented its case on their involvement in the group's activities, outlining their roles within the operation. However, the jury did not find sufficient evidence to convict them of playing any part in the international importation aspect of the scheme. They were therefore acquitted of conspiracy to evade the prohibition on importing controlled drugs. The evidence established that their roles were more limited in scope. They acted at the UK end of the operation, receiving and unloading the shipment once it arrived in Birmingham. Their level of involvement was identified as hands-on operational support, rather than any form of strategic or managerial control. Their sentencing hearing took place in November 2025. Although the heroin haul exceeded £20 million in street value, the sentencing exercise focused strictly on the offences the jury had found proven. This is where the court imposed suspended sentences: 24 months for Colin, 18 months for Lee, both suspended for 2 years. The reasoning, while not extensively detailed in reporting, reflected the fact that they had not been convicted of organising or directing the smuggling route. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.